Hello, I'm Rebecca Kimbel. With all the news on polygamy as of late, with the movie The Outlaw Prophet, with Warren Jeffs being shown on Dateline and Unbreakable with Rebecca Musser, with Anderson Cooper and Mike Watkiss bringing shows on television lately, I thought it would be a very good idea for you to hear a discussion about the inside culture of polygamy. This will be a 4-part series. Our guest is Victoria Reynolds. Victoria and I have a lot in common. We were both raised in the AUB, the Apostolic United Brethren, which is the same polygamist group that Cody Brown and Sister Wives belong to. I was married into the FLDS. You all have heard of Warren Jeffs in the news and his numerous child brides. Warren Jeffs' father, Reynolds Jeffs, performed my marriage when I was a child bride. If you saw the movie Outlaw Prophet, it was very, very close to being extremely authentic. I say close because the movie was kind compared to how we grew up. I am related to many famous polygamists. Tom Green, a former TV polygamist with 5 child brides, had 3 of them that were his stepdaughters. The youngest was my niece, Linda Coons. Rolling Stones magazine referred to the Kingston clan as America's most twisted crime family. I have nieces that are married into the Kingston clan. The most notorious polygamist of all is Ervil LeBaron. He was known as the Mormon Manson. He had approximately 30 people murdered. Ervil LeBaron's brother, Verlin, was married to 2 of my sisters and 1 of my cousins. Yes, the mass murderer was my brother-in-law's brother. One of those murdered was my Uncle Reuben, who was the head of the Apostolic United Brethren and the prophet before his brother Owen Allred took his place. Of course, Owen Allred is also my uncle. With all of the news on polygamy lately, I'm very, very grateful. This gives Victoria and I an opportunity to have a discussion, to educate you about the inside of the culture, why people stay, and why they do just what they do. So from 2 women who were fortunate enough to escape polygamy, please join us in this educational conversation. And I want to thank all the big media shows, because when we first spoke out, no one cared to listen. They thought it was just too bizarre to be true. Please welcome my guest, Victoria Reynolds. Victoria Reynolds, what a wonderful pleasure to have you back.
It's a pleasure to be here as always.
You are an author, a writer, and quite a renowned person in many circles. And one of those circles is the fact you're a human rights activist and that you and I have a similar history and a similar objective. Tell people what our history is.
So Rebecca and I were both born in a polygamist cult. And Actually, technically it was the same one, but we didn't know this until we just met a few years ago by Facebook. I've met the most amazing people on Facebook. And yeah, we grew up with exactly the same belief system, or BS as I like to call it.
How true. Tell people what we were taught to believe in the name of freedom of choice and religious freedom.
Oh my goodness, everything under the sun that is hurtful.
Everything that is hurtful.
Yeah.
And choose the biggest topic.
Wow. You know what? Of course, polygamy is right there at the top because it is one of the things that sets us aside from all of the other religious cults that are out there. It's one of the things that makes us a little bit different. We had a lot of beliefs in there that were similar to other cults, but polygamy was the one that stands out the most because it's something that's unique and different and people seem to be fascinated with.
And polygamy is hurtful because?
Well, it's based on a very ancient practice when women were owned by men as nothing more than cattle. So essentially, there was a time in human history when women were owned by men and bartered with as part of a man's goods between men building their kingdoms. And that's where polygamy stems from. It's from this time in human history when men literally collected women. And the men who had the most money could buy the most women. And women were used for bartering between men. If you wanted to do a favor for the king, or if you need to get in better graces with the king, you just give him a daughter.
So polygamy is called a freedom of choice, but tell people what freedom of choice means where we grew up.
Well, that really confused me as a child. This whole freedom of choice idea had me very, very confused. So we were raised with this belief that there was this war in heaven, and that the whole war in heaven was over whether we would get freedom of choice or not when we come to earth. Now, you and I have laughed about this whole war in heaven thing anyway, because heaven's supposed to be a peaceful place, right? For some reason, there was this big war.
Right.
And whether we would have free will choice or not. And ultimately, I won't get into the story, but ultimately we were given supposedly free will choice when we came to earth. But we really didn't, because then we were raised with this belief that God had everything planned out from start to finish. Before we were even born, it was all planned out, and God already knew every choice we were going to make in advance. Therefore, did we really have free will choice? That was so confusing to me.
But what if you chose something you were not told you had to choose?
But God already knew ahead of time that you were going to choose it.
And what were the consequences?
That you wouldn't get to go to heaven.
And there were other consequences here on earth, maybe to save your soul?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, everything we did here on earth was based on where we wanted to end up, like so far out in the future that we weren't allowed to ever really live.
So just like Islam with the honor killings, we had blood covenants to save our soul in our religion, didn't we?
Yes, and it's not that different. It really comes down to the misperception of what honor is. And that if we didn't honor our religion and honor our parents and honor their particular belief, our soul's destiny was on the line, and even our physical well-being was on the line. There were threats to if you said anything or did anything that wasn't in alignment with the belief system, there were certain rituals that would take your life because you were better off dead than alive. That would actually save your soul if they killed you.
Yeah, save you so that you would be in heaven. So it was an act of love to kill you.
Right.
And this is what we were taught.
It's one of the things we were taught. And polygamy was a part of that.
It's interesting that you and I came from the same cult, which is the Apostolic United Brethren, which is the same group that Cody Brown and his wives belong to.
Right.
And so the fundamental doctrines, the foundation of the faith, is identical.
Precisely.
So why do Cody's wives show the world how much polygamy is wonderful?
Because they have to.
Because they have to.
Because they have to. I
And-
mean, we're taught from the time we were really small to put on a happy face, put on a smiley face, and pretend everything is perfect.
No matter what.
No matter what.
Because
And behind closed doors, they're really suffering.
And what is it if a woman has feelings that are negative and she's hurt, sad, jealous? What happens?
Well, she's discredited. She doesn't deserve to go to heaven.
And she's evil.
And she's evil. Because coming to the temptations of Satan.
She's succumbing to the temptations of Satan if she honors her feelings of hurt, rejection, or sacrifice.
Yes. By being a normal human being.
But yet the men, if the men had to share their one and only mate that they would ever have in life over and over again, would they have the same problem?
Well, as human beings, I would think so.
But
But
women-
they would never know because that's not part of the code to even... that's unheard of. A man can't get to heaven without at least 3 wives. And a woman can't get to heaven unless he lets her have at least 3 wives. Hey, people don't understand the whole polygamy thing. And it's not about free will choice. It's not about a lifestyle choice. It's having a proverbial gun held at your head and said, if you don't do it this way, if you don't take it up the whatever and pretend you love it, you don't get to go to heaven.
And define honor.
Well, honor is an interesting thing. And the misperception is that it means to obey. We have this misperception that honor is the same thing as obey, and it's not. When you truly honor your parents, it means becoming the very best person that you can be as a representative of the honor of your parents. It's not about obey and doing what I say or else. It's a mode of respect, but not respect out of fear. Like you and I were raised with this belief that respect is something that you do out of fear. Respect is something that you do out of love, and so is honor. So one of the things I love to talk about is how important self-honor is. It's about loving and respecting and being the best person you can be in what feels right and best. That's what honor actually is. It has nothing to do with obey.
But the faith that held our religion together was fear.
It is, as it is with a lot of belief systems. And a lot of beliefs in general are fear-based. In literally fear, terrorizing people was the glue that held the religion together. Yeah.
And does today.
And does today.
As it always has.
As it always has, yeah.
In the foundational belief, the basic beliefs of these polygamous cults that claim or blame Mormonism, that claim or blame Islam, they have a mandatory compliance or there's a fatalistic possibility.
Right.
And this is freedom of choice?
No.
What is freedom of choice?
Freedom of choice is being able to make conscious choices. I mean, we all have it. Ultimately, every person on this planet has freedom of choice, whether they realize they do or not. Because if I choose to not choose, therefore I'm actually choosing. And so part of the role that I want to play is being able to teach people what freedom really is. We all have freedom of choice, and at the same time, when that freedom of choice is being coerced, how free are you really to make that choice? And these are choices that are based in coercion. Such tremendous fear, you're literally terrorized into making a choice. You're not making the choice consciously based on what's best for you. You're making a choice out of absolute fear for your short-term and eternal worth.
And the concept is that these men will become gods in heaven and people their own planet with their own seed, and that's why they need so many wives. And that's for all the men that have the priesthood that believe in this, because the priesthood is God's power.
Right.
So there's one thing I really want people to grasp here. Maybe you can help me, because I've been working on this since I was a kid trying to figure it out. If all of your daughters are given to other men to build their kingdoms, and all of your sons have kingdoms of their own and become gods, how in the world do you get enough people to people your planet? There aren't any left.
Well, not everyone is worthy.
Not everyone is worthy.
Remember, if you remember how the way that the belief system is created, only certain people get to be the cream of the crop. Only a few people get to be at the top of the pyramid. Not every son, according to our religion, gets to the place where they are worthy of being a god. They become servants, according to our religion. They become manservants. They're there to serve the gods who were worthy of making it to the top of the pyramid.
Just like the wives that don't make it become servants.
Correct.
For time and eternity.
Right.
So what's a woman's place as a wife if she makes it to eternity and she's married to a god?
She gets to be part of the harem. She gets to have God's babies for eternity. I mean, it really is just about breeding babies.
So,
she doesn't get to be called a goddess. I mean, you and I were raised. I'd never even heard the term goddess until literally a couple of years ago.
Right.
This celebration of the goddess. And at first I thought, well, that's just freaky. I mean, now I get it because I call her the divine feminine. And that masculine and feminine are necessary for all creation. We would have, the term goddess, this idea that we would actually someday die and be a goddess, never had that concept. It was men grow up or die and become gods, and women die who are worthy, who that God sees as worthy enough to be in heaven with them, because a woman can't get into heaven unless a man reaches down, sees her worthy, and brings her up.
So she's got to save him so he can save her, but she's got to save him first by being compliant with the other wives.
Correct. So you got to play nice with the other wives, and if you play nice with the other wives, then you're worthy of making him a god, and then once he becomes a god, then he reaches back down and brings you up to be with him. So he can reach down and have as many women as he wants because, he needs all those wives. You literally become just a baby maker. You don't get to be revered as a goddess or a god's wife. Nobody prays to you. You're just a baby maker. You're like an eternal breeding machine.
But that's what we were here on Earth.
Yes, this is just because this is just school. This is like the learning ground for what we're going to do for eternity, according to the way I was raised.
So no birth control because that's a sin. Mm-hmm. Having a child as often as possible, and it's okay if you die because the other women will raise your children, mm-hmm. and sacrificing all of your life and having more and more children, less and less of a husband. And you age out and watch him take younger wives and walk away and leave you with responsibility, as we have seen, and you love it and you sacrifice to God your whole life because your life is one of sacrifice. I watched my mom literally collect sacrificial wounds to like brown stamps to trade in to God in heaven so that in eternity she'd be acceptable. But according to my understanding and yours, you get the same thing in eternity. That's what your reward is.
I know. So when I was a teenager, when I realized that that's what the destiny, I kind of went, no, I think I'd actually rather be a servant.
Well, yeah, you don't have to have a baby every year.
Yeah.
And how could you have a baby every year when your husband's impregnating all these other women he can possibly find for his kingdom? But still, what's the point? You're single and occasionally you're owned, you're chattel. Right. You'll never have a romance. You'll never have anybody that puts you on a pedestal and says, you are the love of my life and the only one. You'll never have loyalty. And yet it's a religion based on breeding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was raised knowing from the time I was a little girl that my worth was in my womb. That was the only thing I was worth, was the number of babies I could someday produce to help build God's kingdom through men.
And weren't we also raised in a white supremacy group?
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. The interesting thing is that I let go of the whole belief that anyone darker than me was a child of Satan. But what's really fascinating is even though logically I had let that go eons ago, and I have a lot of friends who are every race under the sun. Even until a couple of years ago, if I went to hug one of my friends who I love dearly, my heart would still race. even though logically I had let that go years ago, my body was still responding to the fear that had been indoctrinated in me as a child, that if my skin ever touched the skin of a dark person, I would spend eternity in hell. I was like on the outside and loving my friends and loving the beauty they bring my life, my heart still pounding in fear. That's how deeply rooted that belief was.
Well, we were taught they were the seed of Cain and they were Satan's children.
Yes.
And that's terrifying to a child.
Terrifying.
Absolutely terrifying.
I would go to hell just for even touching one.
Now, according to our religion, you didn't marry into the black race, but every other race they married into, because I was taught that they could literally breed the color out of that race and redeem them.
I hadn't heard that one. Oh, I love some of the individual stuff that goes on behind closed doors of families, because I talked to other people who said, well, my parents never taught me that. So there is this overall indoctrination, and then what I see are parents infusing their own perspective behind closed doors. And that one I hadn't heard. What I was raised with was that black people, a very dear friend of mine calls chocolate. I love it. It's like I was the only chocolate kid in the church choir. I laugh. I'm like, oh, so there's caramel kids and chocolate kids and vanilla kids. And I'm seeing all these delicious foods. Because to me, all of this color is delicious.
It is.
And that the other kids were only mildly cursed. So that was okay. It was just the chocolate ones that you couldn't go anywhere near because they were cursed for eternity. That God had that they were intended to be our slaves even in heaven.
My father would not allow me to get a suntan because I was white and God's chosen people were white. And because I was among the lightest of his daughters, he was terribly, terribly demanding that I never be in the sun, because God loved white people the most. Mm-hmm. And we have so many relatives that married Hispanic girls. And Dad actually said that in a few generations the color would be bred out of them and all the children would be white. And that's very interesting because some of those red are the most
like
beautiful children. The
something.
mix is magnificent. And they didn't get lighter. They didn't get lighter, but that's what I was taught, that the color would literally be bred out of them as they turned to God and embraced the gospel. They would all become white and delightsome people.
So I did hear white and delightsome people, but one of the things I was taught was that if they proved their worthiness here on earth, that they would become white in the hereafter.
How arrogantly, how piously arrogant.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. And yet, as children, that was instilled with great fear because God marked his people out according to the color. His own children, he loved according to their color. The Creator.
Oh, yeah, because this unconditionally loving God we believed in was a narcissistic, very conditionally loving God. So I will only love you. Oh, but not you.
Well, I don't know about you, but I realized that our God was so mean, the devil was on unemployment and could only get a part-time job as a scapegoat. Because God himself would destroy you, have you destroyed, have you sacrificed to save your soul. Who needed the devil? The poor guy was out of work.
But not entirely, though, because if you screwed up, God would say, hey, devil, I wanted to make that one over there suffer. Because if I remember being blamed, if there's anything that happened to me that made me suffer, it's because I must have done something wrong, and I deserved it. And the devil got in and was able to tempt me into being a bad person, and I deserved the suffering that came with it because I allowed myself to be tempted. So, it's almost like God told Satan, "Okay, go get that one."
So Satan could have the little roles of badgering, but God brought the pestilence and destroyed you all.
Right.
Destroyed the earth.
Yeah, because you destroy your soul, yeah.
Yeah. But the devil could play with you in between by making you miserable.
Right.
As an adult, I look back and I realize that if we hadn't been cultured in this from birth, it would be absolutely impossible to accept it. Now, I do realize that men convert and take their wife, their current wife, and their children into polygamy, and their wife has no way of supporting the children if she leaves. So she stays.
Right.
Because she thinks the poverty will be worse than the religion. So there again, we have what's called the baby trap. Let's talk about the baby trap in polygamy.
Well, you know, that old saying, keep them barefoot and pregnant, really holds true in that. As long as a woman is pregnant, she, even biologically, when a woman is pregnant and when a woman has a toddler, a baby and then a toddler, 100% her focus biologically, this has nothing to do with religion or with our cult or anything else, biologically, all of her focus goes into raising that child and getting it to the point where it's independent. That's just that's the case with all animals.
It's nature.
It's nature. So if you keep a woman pregnant and with babies all the time, she cannot think for herself. It's almost physically impossible.
She's thinking for survival.
And it's not
child
for the
and her
survival
children.
of her child. It's not even about herself. It's about the survival of the children, which is why we talk about women sacrificing themselves for a couple of years until their kids get old enough. It's almost like, even as a mother in this modern world, you set your needs aside for the needs of your children as much as you don't want to. It still happens because it's built into us biologically, unless we consciously make an effort to choose otherwise. It doesn't mean that we have to put our child's needs, you know, like, screw my kids, I'm going to go be selfish and do what's best for me. It's just about consciously choosing to not lose yourself in motherhood. And it's very difficult not to, because that's how we're built biologically. In this belief where a woman has to spat out one after another, there's never an opportunity for her to ever think clearly about herself. I mean, you can't. It's pretty much impossible.
When I was a child, I married. And I had 6 children to be responsible for before I was ever allowed to be responsible for myself or knew how.
So how old were you when you got married again?
Allegedly 15, but my birth certificate's a forgery. I grew 2.5 inches after the birth of my first child, and looking back on all the intimate circumstances, I seriously doubt that I was 15. But the children were 15 and got their birth certificates later, about the time they married, because at that time the assumption was that if a child was married at the age of 15 with their parents' consent, even into polygamy, it took it out of the child molest laws.
Right.
We hope this gives you a greater understanding of how cults work, why they're dangerous, why people stay, and what causes people to believe